The greatest mistake of any empire was never the lack of soldiers, weapons, or gold. It was trusting too much. Misplaced trust destroyed kings, toppled generals, and ruined merchants. Machiavelli knew this. He saw leaders lose everything not because they were weak, but because they believed in allies who, at the right moment, turned into traitors. And that's why he left a brutal warning. Trust weakens, control protects. Stay until the end, because when you see the stories I'm about to reveal, you'll understand why even today those who control survive, and those who trust too much always fall. History is not written only in bloody battles or glorious coronations. Often it's defined in whispers, in broken promises, in handshakes that hid daggers. Machiavelli knew this. He didn't just observe declared wars, but the silent ones fought inside councils, at negotiating tables, among allies who swore loyalty by day and plotted conspiracies at night. For him, trust was always a trap. A leader who blindly trusts opens the doors of his own palace to the enemy. And that's why so many empires fell not by the strength of external foes, but by betrayal from within. Take the Roman Empire. For centuries, its generals were feared across the known world. But how often were they toppled not by barbarians, but by senators who sold their votes, plotted assassinations, and poisoned banquets? Julius Caesar did not die in battle against a foreign army. He died under the knives of men he called friends. The fatal blow did not come from a distant enemy, but from Brutus, the one he trusted most. Centuries later, the lesson repeated in Florence. The city was a boiling cauldron of fragile alliances where powerful families fought for every inch of influence. The Medici, the Sforza, the Pazzi, embraced at lavish parties, planned each other's ruin. Machiavelli witnessed firsthand the results of blind trust. He saw rulers believe sweet promises only to wake days later surrounded by enemies within their own walls. And what about Constantinople, the jewel of the East? The city that had resisted dozens of sieges fell not because its walls were finally broken by brute force, but because inside those walls there were divisions, betrayals, and internal disputes. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II didn't just need cannons. He needed only to wait for trust among Byzantine leaders to turn into suspicion and then into treachery. When the gates opened, it wasn't only Turkish might that destroyed the city, it was the Byzantines' inability to control their own allies. Machiavelli didn't record these events as distant tales. He saw them as immutable laws of power. To him, trusting was like placing your life in another's hands, an act of dangerous naivete. He who believes an ally's word hands over the key to his own neck, he might have written. And in his letters and analyses, he repeated the idea in many forms. Alliances are useful while interests align, but interests change, and with them, loyalty disappears. It's no coincidence that over the centuries, the longest-lived rulers were not the kindest or most generous, but the most distrustful. They learned to smile in public while planning in secret. They trusted not words but results, not promises but control. It's hard to accept, but history showed Machiavelli again and again. Empires fall less from the strength of enemies and more from the weight of traitorous hands at home. Trust is the path to a fall. Control is the road to survival. Trust is sold as a virtue, but in the logic of power, it always charges too high a price. Across history, leaders who dared to trust blindly paid the most. Their crown, their life, their legacy. Machiavelli didn't see tragedy in this, but a rule. To him, trust was a dangerous luxury, affordable only to those with nothing to lose, and the powerful could not afford that luxury. Look at the Medici. In Florence they funded artists, architects and poets, but their true skill was manipulating political and economic alliances. When Cosimo de' Medici trusted allies without constant vigilance, he saw his fortune and power threatened within days. Trust which seemed to strengthen him, almost destroyed him. He quickly learned the secret of survival wasn't believing everyone. It was putting each man in his debt, so betrayal would cost more than loyalty. In Venice, the Doges learned the same lesson. The city of canals flourished through commerce, but every contract carried risk. Merchants who trusted distant partners too much were easily betrayed, losing ships, cargo, and entire crews. Those who survived for decades weren't the most generous but the most suspicious. They built spy networks, demanded reports from every port, and punished any failure severely. For them, trust wasn't a bond, it was a weakness. And consider the Ottoman Empire. Sultans had harems, armies, viziers, and generals, yet even surrounded by gold and soldiers, they lived in fear of betrayal. Some went so far as to have brothers blinded or sons executed as children to prevent internal conspiracies. Cruel, yes, but to them it was how to keep trust from becoming daggers in the dark. Machiavelli observed these patterns and made it clear, trusting too much is not kindness. It's an invitation to ruin. He who believes promises without guarantees puts himself in an inferior position by revealing naivete. He who trusts without control exposes himself as easy prey. And perhaps the cruelest truth is that the higher a man rises, the less he can trust. A peasant can trust his neighbor, for he has little to lose. A merchant may trust a few clients, since failure costs only coins. But a prince, a ruler, the powerful, for them, a single failure can mean losing everything. The price of trust is downfall, and history shows it's always paid with interest. If trust is the road to ruin, control is the fortress that sustains power. Machiavelli didn't just describe this, he lived in a time when every ruler knew that without control he ruled only on loan. Control was more than command. It was vigilance, restraint, and knowing every detail of the lives of subjects and allies. Control isn't gratuitous cruelty. It's the only guarantee of survival. The Medici understood this after nearly losing everything. They didn't just fund artists. They kept accountants, bankers, and informants in every corner of the city. Every rival family was monitored, every contract supervised, every debt recorded. No one escaped. Their net, this invisible web, was woven not from trust, but from obligations. Yesterday's friend knew that if he betrayed today, he'd lose not only privileges, but his life. In medieval France, kings consolidated power by creating standing armies that didn't depend on the loyalty of nobles. Previously, they had relied on feudal knights, but each knight could turn into an enemy. By centralizing military forces, the king reduced risk. Control became the key to absolute monarchy. Less trust, more direct command. Machiavelli knew control didn't always need to be visible. Often the most effective kind was subtle, not imposed by the sword, but by the gaze. The ruler who knew his ministers' secrets already controlled them without raising his voice. The leader who kept silent at the right moment forced everyone to weigh each word. Control also expressed itself in justice. In Venice, for example, secret courts, the Council of Ten, judged conspiracies away from public eyes. These trials were swift and quiet. The goal wasn't only to punish, but to spread fear. Everyone knew they were being watched. In imperial China, control even reached the books. Emperors ordered writings that threatened their image to be burned. They didn't trust the people's interpretation. They controlled the collective memory. The same would repeat centuries later when modern dictators realized that more than weapons, whoever controls the narrative controls reality. Machiavelli concluded, "Respect born of trust is unstable. Respect born of control is solid. The first depends on another's goodwill, the second depends only on the ruler's firmness. One can evaporate overnight, the other endures for generations. Thus, for those who seek power, the question is never whom can I trust, but what can I control?" Renaissance Italy was a stage lit by gold, art, and festivities, but behind the curtains blood flowed. It was the perfect world for Machiavelli to observe. City-states like Florence, Rome, and Milan were not only centers of culture, but arenas of psychological warfare, where alliances lasted less than a season and every handshake hid a dagger. The Medici may be the most famous example. Patrons of artists like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, they built a facade of grandeur. But what kept them in power wasn't only palaces or cathedrals. It was their ability to manipulate politics through a fragile web of alliances. When Cosimo de' Medici was accused of conspiracy, he knew he couldn't trust friends. He used gold to buy judges, promises to divide enemies, and when he returned to power, he remembered every traitor. His lesson was clear. Whoever believes in sincere fidelity in politics has already lost. Then came the Borgias, symbols of unscrupulous ambition. Rodrigo Borgia became Pope Alexander VI, but his spiritual crown was sustained by raw manipulation. His son, Cesare Borgia, was the prototype of the Machiavellian prince. He trusted no one, not even his closest allies. He received them with banquets, smiles and wine, and that very night had them strangled if he suspected disloyalty. When he needed obedience, he didn't ask. He offered swift rewards to the faithful and exemplary punishments to traitors. One episode became legendary. Cesare invited rebel leaders to a diplomatic meeting. He welcomed them warmly, assured them he sought peace, even gave them gifts. Hours later, when the men slept, confident, they were arrested, tortured, and executed. Machiavelli, observing closely, was impressed not by the cruelty, but by the effectiveness. To him, Cesare had demonstrated the basic principle of power. Trust creates risks. Absolute control creates stability. And it wasn't only the Borgias and the Medici. The Sforza in Milan and the Pazzi in Florence followed the same logic. The Pazzi even organized a bloody conspiracy against the Medici during Mass, inside Florence's cathedral. There, before the altar, daggers tried to end a rival lineage. Lorenzo de' Medici survived, but the city plunged into chaos. The lesson, once again, was brutal. Trusting pious appearances or sacred rituals was political suicide. These stories weren't exceptions, they were the rule. In Renaissance Italy, loyalty wasn't a reliable currency. It was merely a mask worn until interest required another. Machiavelli understood and recorded, a ruler must be able to manipulate alliances like moving pieces on a board. The mistake is believing any alliance is permanent, ancient. Politics taught that power isn't sustained by trust, but by calculation. And in a world where everyone plays, the only unforgivable mistake is forgetting that today's ally can become tomorrow's enemy. If in politics, power was measured in crowns and armies, in business, it was measured in coins and contracts. But as Machiavelli observed, the logic was the same. Trust was always the weakest link. Merchants and bankers who relied on words alone ended in ruin. Those who prospered understood that promises mean nothing without control. In medieval Venice, merchants built fortunes on maritime routes connecting east and west. Each ship carried spices, silk, and gold, and risk. Distant partners promised profit sharing, captains swore loyalty, but a single chance for greater gain could see a ship change flags or a cargo diverted. Trust evaporated on the high seas. The merchants who survived for decades weren't the most generous, but the most distrustful. They drafted meticulous contracts, hired armed guards, and kept informants in every port. They knew trusting without proof was surrendering their fate. Florentine bankers followed the same rule. The Peruzzi family, for example, financed kings and popes, believing sacred promises would be enough to ensure repayment. They were wrong. When the English crown refused to repay a massive debt, the Peruzzi collapsed, proving that even kings prefer betrayal when the cost of loyalty grows too high. It was a lesson written in blood and coins. Never lend without guarantees you can seize. The Medici learned from that mistake. Their bank grew not because they trusted debtors, but because they bound them in webs of dependency. Popes, princes and merchants owed so much to the Medici they couldn't afford to break agreements. Trust was replaced by something far stronger: economic control. Even Arab merchants crossing the desert knew trust wasn't enough. Entire caravans were plundered by allies who, in the name of old promises, turned into thieves at the first opportunity. Hence practices of hostages and oaths sworn on sacred objects, not because they were morally inviolable, but because fear of punishment outweighed the temptation to betray. From these stories, Machiavelli drew a conclusion that echoes today. In business, as in politics, it isn't words that uphold contracts, but the power to impose consequences. Trust is a fragile currency. Control is the only real reserve of value. And the cruel irony is that, in the ledgers, every profit lost to naivete was recorded in silence. The final balance was always the same. Those who trusted too much lost everything. Those who controlled survived. For Machiavelli, it wasn't enough to observe politics or business. You had to understand the human mind. Betrayal wasn't an accident, but a natural instinct. Man, he said, is fickle, ungrateful, deceitful, and ambitious, not because he's rarely corrupted, but because that is his nature. Thus, trusting human beings is, by definition, building on sand. The psychology of betrayal begins with the perception of weakness. When someone trusts too much, they display vulnerability. It's like prey lying belly up before a predator. The gesture may seem noble, but it awakens dark instincts. The traitor sees opportunity not because he is necessarily cruel, but because another's fragility ignites his ambition. Excessive trust also breeds contempt. The more you give yourself away, the less value you project. The king who shares secrets with all his ministers, the merchant who accepts unfavorable terms to preserve alliances, the husband or wife who tolerates humiliation in the name of peace, all lose respect little by little until their presence inspires nothing but boredom or disdain. There's also fear. In politics, business, or relationships, many believe trust creates closeness. But in truth, misplaced trust reduces the fear others have of you. And without fear, there is no respect. The subordinate who realizes his boss never checks, the ally who knows he won't be punished for failures, the partner who knows forgiveness is guaranteed. Each loses the motivation to remain loyal. In such cases, trust becomes a license to exploit. Machiavelli insisted human nature is opportunistic. Man is loyal so long as it benefits him. When the cost of loyalty exceeds the benefit, betrayal becomes not just probable, but inevitable. That's why prudent rulers don't expect eternal loyalty. They build structures of control that make betrayal costlier than obedience. In the psychology of power, trust is seen as weakness because it reveals the illusion that men are constant. They're not. And the leader who governs as if they were will inevitably be betrayed. The most disturbing part is that this logic repeats everywhere, in war councils, at business tables, and in beds of love. He who begs, who trusts without reserve, who treats words as law, is always one step from disillusion. He who controls, observes, and calculates may seem cold, but he survives. Machiavelli didn't say friendship or love don't exist. He said that when power is at stake, friendship and love give way to interest, and whoever ignores that becomes a victim of betrayal. After seeing betrayals in palaces, conspiracies in councils, and bankruptcies in taverns, Machiavelli reached a conclusion that has cut through the centuries like a blade. Power belongs to those who control, not to those who trust. This is his iron law, one that admits no exceptions. Trust may build fleeting alliances, but control builds lasting fortresses. Trust may seduce hearts for a moment, but control earns respect for generations. Trust opens doors to fragile friendships, but control shuts windows against daggers in the dark. Machiavelli knew this truth was cruel. It denies the idealized image of man as virtuous, kind, and loyal. But he also knew ruling means dealing with man as he is, not as he should be. And man, in essence, is fickle, loyal today, ambitious tomorrow, servant today, rival tomorrow. The prince who trusts in constancy is doomed to disillusion. That's why the iron law is simple. Control everything you can. Control your allies by keeping them dependent. Control your enemies by keeping them watched and divided. Control your wealth so you never lack the means to buy loyalty. Control your image so they cannot destroy you with rumors. And above all, control yourself, for he who doesn't master his own passions will inevitably be mastered by others. This mastery doesn't mean the absence of generosity or affection. It means generosity must be strategic, affection calculated. Give too much and you waste. Trust too much and you expose yourself. Power doesn't require a heartless ruler, but it does require a heart kept behind the walls of reason. Machiavelli saw countless examples confirming this law. Cesare Borgia survived as long as he maintained absolute control. When he fell ill and could no longer rule directly, he fell. The Medici thrived when they controlled banks, cities, and popes, but when they split into factions and trusted promises, they were expelled from Florence. Every fall had the same cause: loss of control. And even today, the logic endures. Governments fall because leaders trust fragile allies. Companies collapse because executives believe in contracts without guarantees. People are emotionally destroyed because they surrender blindly to loves without boundaries. Whenever trust triumphs over control, tragedy is only a matter of time. Machiavelli's iron law is not a gentle recommendation, it's a warning carved in stone. Trust, and you may lose. Control, and you will survive. History has shown us, and Machiavelli confirmed, that it's not the good who are remembered, but the strong. It's not those who trust who survive, but those who control. He who trusts too much always pays the price of naivete. He who controls, even if hated, endures. And now the decision lies before you. Do you prefer to live believing in fragile promises, or to bear the weight of controlling your own destiny? Do you prefer to be loved for a moment, or respected forever? Do you prefer to be remembered as naive, or as someone who could never be ignored? Think carefully. The game of power does not forgive hesitation. Who did you trust most and end up betrayed? Do you believe that even today it's possible to trust someone without risking everything? If you had to choose, would you rather be loved or feared? And remember, this is only the beginning. Click the next video that appears on your screen now and uncover even darker secrets about the power that governs the world. Subscribe to Machiavelli Code Official and never look at trust and control the same way again.